The worst mistake a man can make is believing destiny follows his pride instead of his heart. The silver bells above Moonridge Pack echoed through the valley as every unmated wolf gathered beneath the ancient cedar platform where generations had accepted or rejected the bonds chosen by the moon goddess. Lanterns swayed in the cool evening breeze, scattering warm light across polished stone while hopeful whispers drifted through the crowd like autumn leaves. Evelyn Carter stood alone near the back, her simple pale blue dress untouched by expensive embroidery, her hands folded tightly to stop their trembling. Her fair skin seemed almost luminous beneath the rising moon, and loose strands of chestnut hair framed a face that carried quiet kindness instead of confidence. She had spent 23 years believing that tonight might finally prove she belonged somewhere. Across the platform, Ryan Holloway wore the proud smile everyone expected from the future alpha of Moonridge. Tall, handsome, admired by nearly everyone in the pack, he accepted applause as though it had always belonged to him. When Elder Miriam called Evelyn's name, silence rolled across the gathering. For one impossible heartbeat, hope found its way into Evelyn's chest. She lifted her eyes toward Ryan, searching for even the smallest trace of warmth. Instead, she found only polite distance. Ryan stepped forward, squared his shoulders, and spoke clearly enough for every wolf in the valley to hear. "I reject Evelyn Carter as my destined mate." The words did not strike like thunder. They settled gently, almost quietly, and somehow that hurt even more. Gasps rippled through the crowd before whispers replaced them. Some looked away with sympathy. Others smiled behind carefully hidden hands. Evelyn felt every stare pressing against her like invisible weight. She lowered her head, forcing herself to breathe before answering with the only dignity she had left. "I accept your decision." Her voice remained steady, though her heart felt strangely hollow. Ryan nodded once, relieved the ceremony had ended without argument, then turned toward the cheering friends waiting beside him. Their laughter carried across the square while Evelyn stepped backward, making herself smaller with every careful step until she nearly disappeared into the shadows beyond the lantern light. No one noticed the elderly woman quietly wiping away a tear. No one noticed the old wolf at the edge of the crowd lowering his head in silent disappointment. Most of all, no one noticed the dark carriage that had stopped beyond the cedar trees just moments before the rejection. 6 royal guards remained perfectly still beside black horses whose silver bridles reflected the moonlight. At the center stood a man wrapped in a charcoal cloak embroidered with the crest of the crown pack. His presence alone silenced the forest around him. Alpha King Cale Ashbourne had arrived without announcement, intending only to observe Moonridge's traditions before continuing his journey north by sunrise. Yet the moment Evelyn whispered her acceptance, something unseen stirred within him. His silver eyes never followed Ryan. They remained fixed on the forgotten Omega walking away alone. She never looked back. She never realized the most powerful alpha in the kingdom had forgotten every schedule, every political obligation, and every reason for coming here because of the quiet strength carried by the woman another man had just thrown away. Evelyn Carter left the ceremony long before the music ended, because staying would have meant watching everyone celebrate a future that no longer included her. The narrow stone path leading toward the workers' cottages stretched nearly half a mile through towering pines, and each quiet step felt lighter than the burden she had carried for years. The bond she once believed would shape her life was gone, leaving behind an unfamiliar stillness instead of endless questions. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky with soft shades of gold, Moonridge Pack had already returned to its ordinary routines, and so had Evelyn. She tied her chestnut hair behind her neck, slipped on a worn gray apron, and began another day without expecting kindness from anyone. Before sunrise she swept the meeting hall, polished wooden tables scarred by decades of ceremonies, carried fresh water from the creek, nearly 300 yards away, and stacked enough firewood to last through the cool mountain evening. No one thanked her. Most hardly noticed she was there. To them, she had simply become another invisible Omega, whose greatest purpose was making everyone else's life easier. Yet whenever an elderly pack member struggled to carry groceries, Evelyn quietly offered her help. When children scraped their knees chasing each other through the village square, she cleaned the dirt away and comforted them with gentle smiles until their tears disappeared. Even frightened animals seemed strangely drawn toward her calm presence. A small injured robin landed beside her while she collected herbs near the forest edge that afternoon, and instead of flying away, It rested peacefully in her hands until it gathered enough strength to return to the sky. Several villagers witnessed the moment but quickly dismissed it as coincidence. Kindness, after all, had never earned respect inside Moonridge. Strength did. Power did. Titles did. Meanwhile, inside the pack house, excitement continued to spread because Alpha King Kale Ashbourne had unexpectedly postponed his departure. His royal advisors quietly reminded him that 3 neighboring packs were waiting for his inspection before the end of the week, but Kale simply studied the valley from the balcony overlooking the village below. His sharp silver eyes followed the movement of ordinary people beginning their day, though his attention repeatedly returned to one familiar figure carrying baskets, delivering medicine, repairing fences, or helping wherever someone needed another pair of hands. She never asked for recognition. She never looked toward the royal residence hoping to be noticed. She worked with the same quiet determination whether someone was watching or not. General Marcus finally stepped beside the king and spoke with respectful curiosity. "Your Majesty, should I prepare the horses?" Kale remained silent for several moments before answering without looking away from the village. "Not yet." Marcus frowned slightly. "Are you expecting someone?" Kale's expression remained unreadable as a faint breeze stirred the edge of his dark cloak. "No," he replied calmly. "I am waiting to see whether someone remains exactly the same after losing everything she believed defined her." At that exact moment, Evelyn noticed an elderly baker struggling to lift a heavy flour sack that weighed nearly 50 pounds. Without hesitation, she crossed the street, smiled warmly, and lifted one side while the old man managed the other. Neither of them realized that high above the village, unseen behind the stone balcony, the Alpha King watched every quiet act with growing certainty. The rejection ceremony had ended, but for Kale Ashbourne, the real story had only just begun. The following morning arrived wrapped in cool mountain air scented with pine and fresh rain, and for the first time since entering Moonridge Pack, Alpha King Kale Ashbourne left the royal residence without his guards surrounding him. Dressed in a simple charcoal traveling coat with no royal crest upon his shoulders, he blended easily into the quiet forest trails where few villagers wandered before breakfast. His silver eyes carried none of the authority that usually silenced entire halls, only the calm curiosity of a traveler who wished to remain unnoticed. General Marcus had protested the plan, reminding the king that traveling alone invited unnecessary risk, but Kale had answered with a faint smile. The truth rarely appears before a throne. Nearly an hour later, Evelyn Carter walked the familiar path leading toward the eastern meadow with a woven basket resting against her hip. Every Wednesday she gathered wild lavender, mint, and mountain chamomile for the elderly healer who could no longer climb the hills herself. The trail stretched almost a mile through quiet woods where golden sunlight filtered between towering branches, and the peaceful silence allowed Evelyn to forget the whispers that still followed her through the village. As she rounded a bend, she noticed a man sitting alone beside a fallen cedar tree. His coat was dusty, one sleeve slightly torn by rough bark, and his breathing appeared slow as though exhaustion had finally forced him to rest. Without hesitation, Evelyn set down her basket and approached carefully. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked with gentle concern. Kale slowly lifted his head, hiding the quiet surprise that crossed his face. He had expected caution, perhaps even fear from a lone woman meeting a stranger deep in the forest. Instead, he found only sincere kindness. "I lost my way," he answered honestly enough. "I thought I could finish the trail before sunrise, but I underestimated the distance." Evelyn glanced toward the thick forest surrounding them before offering a warm smile. "The nearest village is still almost a mile away. You should not continue until you have something to eat." She opened her basket without another word and handed him the small loaf of fresh bread she had packed for herself, along with an apple and a flask of cool spring water. Kale accepted them slowly. "If you give these to me, what will you have?" Evelyn shrugged with quiet ease. "I can always eat later. Someone who is tired should not keep walking on an empty stomach." Her answer lingered in the cool morning air longer than either of them expected. While Kale thanked her, a soft whimper drifted from nearby bushes. Evelyn immediately turned toward the sound and gently parted the tall grass. A young fox with pale red fur had become tangled beneath fallen branches after the previous night storm. It struggled only briefly before becoming still as Evelyn knelt beside it. She spoke softly, her voice carrying the same warmth she had offered the stranger only moments before. "You are safe now." Patiently lifting each branch one at a time, she freed the frightened animal before stepping back to give it space. The little fox hesitated, looked directly into her eyes, and then disappeared peacefully into the trees. Kale watched every moment without speaking. He had seen warriors rescue companions on battlefields and nobles donate fortunes before cheering crowds. But this simple Omega had offered food to a stranger and compassion to a frightened creature, without expecting recognition from either. As Evelyn picked up her basket once more, she smiled politely. "The village is this way if you would like to follow me." Kale rose to his feet, studying the quiet strength hidden beneath her gentle nature, and for the first time in many years, the certainty inside his heart became impossible to ignore. The woman everyone believed had been rejected possessed a spirit that no title, ceremony, or pack could ever measure. By the time they reached the edge of Moonridge Village, the morning market had already come alive with the familiar sounds of wooden carts rolling across stone roads and merchants greeting their first customers. Evelyn Carter thanked the traveler for keeping her company along the forest trail, never suspecting that the quiet man walking beside her carried the authority to command every pack across the Northern Territories. She offered one final smile before turning toward the healer's cottage with her basket of herbs balanced carefully against her arm. Cale Ashbourne remained standing where she left him, watching until she disappeared beyond a row of flowering dogwood trees. Only then did General Marcus emerge from a nearby alley, clearly relieved to find his king unharmed. He lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, the council has been waiting for nearly 2 hours." Cale answered without urgency. "They can wait a little longer." Marcus followed the king's gaze toward the distant cottage. "The Omega again?" Cale did not deny it. Instead, he asked a question that caught his loyal commander completely off guard. "Tell me, Marcus, how many people offered assistance to a stranger this morning before asking his name?" Marcus hesitated. "Very few, I imagine." Cale nodded almost to himself. "Exactly one." Throughout the afternoon, preparations continued for the king's formal inspection of Moonridge Pack. Leaders polished ceremonial armor, servants decorated the great hall with fresh banners, and Ryan Holloway spent hours rehearsing speeches that he believed would impress the royal court. His confidence had only grown since the rejection ceremony, convinced he had demonstrated the strength expected of a future alpha. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent the same afternoon repairing blankets inside the village workshop alongside several elderly women whose eyesight had begun to fade with age. She quietly stitched worn fabric together while listening to their stories, laughing softly whenever one of them recalled childhood adventures from decades earlier. She never complained about her own circumstances, even when another young Omega entered the workshop and casually remarked that rejected mates rarely found happiness. Evelyn simply smiled and answered, "Kindness is still worth choosing, even when life does not unfold the way we hoped." The words lingered in the room long after the conversation ended. Late that evening, Cale requested a private meeting with Elder Miriam before the official banquet began. The elderly leader welcomed him into the library, where shelves of weathered journals reached nearly to the ceiling. She expected questions about trade agreements or border security. Instead, the king surprised her with a single name. "Tell me about Evelyn Carter." Elder Miriam's calm expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "She is one of our Omegas." Cale remained silent. The elder sighed gently, understanding that such an answer would never satisfy him. "She lost both parents when she was young. Since then she has served this pack without asking for anything in return. She has never sought power, never competed for attention, and never allowed bitterness to harden her heart." Cale listened carefully before asking another question. "Why would someone reject a woman like that?" Elder Miriam looked toward the window where moonlight spilled across the old wooden floor. "Some wolves spend their lives chasing what shines the brightest. They forget that the strongest light is often the quietest." Those words echoed inside Cale's thoughts long after he left the library. Outside, the evening breeze carried the scent of cedar and fresh rain across the peaceful village. Somewhere beyond the royal residence, Evelyn was likely finishing another ordinary day, unaware that the most powerful alpha in the kingdom was no longer studying her out of curiosity. He was searching for an answer that only destiny seemed willing to reveal, and with every passing hour, He became more certain that Moonridge Pack had overlooked something far more precious than anyone dared imagine. The next evening, the great hall of Moonridge glowed beneath. Hundreds of candles as leaders from neighboring territories gathered to honor Alpha King Kale Ashbourne before his departure. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across polished oak tables while musicians filled the room with gentle melodies that echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Every important family stood proudly in their finest clothing, hoping to earn even a brief moment of the king's attention. Ryan Holloway remained near the front beside the pack leaders, convinced that his confidence and reputation would secure the admiration he believed he deserved. Across the hall, Evelyn Carter quietly arranged fresh flowers and placed pitchers of cool spring water on each table before stepping toward the back wall where servants traditionally remained unseen throughout the evening. She intended to leave as soon as her work was finished, but Elder Miriam approached with an unexpected request. "Stay until the ceremony ends," she said softly. "There is no rule that says you must disappear." Evelyn hesitated before offering a grateful smile. She remained near one of the stone columns, hoping not to draw anyone's attention. Moments later, the royal doors opened, and every conversation faded into respectful silence as Kale entered wearing a midnight blue ceremonial coat trimmed with silver thread. His calm expression revealed nothing, yet his eyes instinctively searched the room. They moved past decorated nobles, respected warriors, and ambitious young alphas before quietly settling on the woman standing alone beside the column. For only a heartbeat, the corners of his mouth softened into the faintest smile before his attention returned to the formal greetings awaiting him. Ryan noticed the brief exchange and dismissed it immediately. Surely the king had simply been surveying the room. During dinner, council members presented reports on harvests, trade routes, and border patrols, but Kale seemed distracted by something beyond official business. When dessert was served, he unexpectedly stood and thanked the village for its hospitality before requesting permission to meet the people who worked behind the scenes to keep Moonridge running each day. Murmurs spread across the hall. Such a request was highly unusual. One by one, cooks, healers, stable workers, gardeners, and craftsmen stepped forward. Finally, Evelyn reluctantly joined them, her hands folded neatly before her. Kale greeted each person with sincere appreciation, asking simple questions about their work and listening carefully to every answer. When he reached Evelyn, the room became strangely quiet. "Miss Carter," he said warmly, "I believe we met on the Eastern Trail yesterday morning." Evelyn looked up in surprise, recognizing the traveler's calm voice before the elegant clothing could convince her eyes. "It was you," she whispered almost to herself. Kale inclined his head with quiet respect. "Thank you again for your kindness." Confused whispers immediately swept through the gathered guests. Ryan stared in disbelief as the king continued speaking with the Omega he had rejected only days earlier. Kale asked about the healer she assisted, the children she cared for, and the herbs she collected each week. Evelyn answered honestly, never realizing that every humble response only deepened the king's admiration. Across the hall, Elder Miriam watched the conversation with thoughtful eyes. An old memory stirred within her heart, one she had buried for more than 20 years. She quietly glanced toward Evelyn's left wrist where the edge of her sleeve had slipped back while carrying a tray earlier that evening. For just an instant beneath the candlelight, she thought she saw the outline of a pale silver crescent, hidden against Evelyn's fair skin before it faded once again. Elder Miriam drew a slow breath, saying nothing to anyone. Some secrets revealed themselves only when destiny decided the time had finally come. The banquet continued beneath a sky filled with bright stars, yet the atmosphere inside the great hall had quietly changed. Conversation still floated through the room, musicians still played gentle melodies, and servants continued moving gracefully between the long wooden tables, but more than one pair of curious eyes kept drifting toward Evelyn Carter. She noticed the attention immediately and lowered her gaze, hoping the evening would end before anyone decided she deserved another whispered joke. Instead, she focused on collecting empty glasses and folded napkins with the same quiet care she brought to every task. Across the hall, Ryan Holloway watched the scene with growing discomfort. Only 3 nights earlier, everyone had praised his decision to reject an ordinary Omega. Now the Alpha King himself had spoken with her longer than he had spoken with any future Alpha in the room. Pride refused to let Ryan ignore it. With a confident smile that barely concealed his irritation, He crossed the hall just as Evelyn finished lifting a serving tray. "You certainly know how to attract attention," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Evelyn paused but answered politely, "I was only doing my work." Ryan gave a small laugh. "Perhaps that is exactly why His Majesty spoke with you. Kings appreciate loyal servants." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared among the younger wolves, while others pretended not to notice the conversation. Evelyn simply nodded. "If serving others is honorable, then I am grateful for the chance." Her calm reply left Ryan without the reaction he expected. Before he could continue, another voice entered the silence. "And what exactly is dishonorable about that?" Every conversation in the great hall stopped. Cale Ashbourne had descended from the raised platform without anyone noticing. His steady footsteps echoed softly across the polished stone floor until he stood only a few feet away. Ryan immediately bowed his head. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect." Cale studied him with composed silver eyes before asking a single question. "Then explain something to me." Ryan straightened carefully. "Of course, Your Majesty." The king glanced briefly toward Evelyn before looking back at the young alpha. "Why did you reject a woman whose first instinct is to help strangers, comfort children, care for the elderly, and ask for nothing in return?" Ryan hesitated. The answer that had once sounded perfectly reasonable suddenly felt strangely hollow beneath the king's gaze. "She is ordinary," he finally replied. "Our pack needs strength beside its future alpha." Cale remained silent for several long seconds. The quiet became almost unbearable. "Strength," the king repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting." He slowly turned toward the assembled leaders. "Tell me, how many warriors have you trained who would willingly surrender their own meal to feed a stranger?" No one answered. "How many nobles would stop an important journey to rescue a frightened animal?" Again only silence. Cale looked back at Ryan, his voice calm but impossible to ignore. "Power without compassion inspires obedience. Compassion with quiet courage inspires loyalty. The second is far more difficult to find." Evelyn felt every eye in the hall settle upon her again, and embarrassment colored her cheeks. She wished the evening would simply end. Yet Elder Miriam was no longer watching Ryan or the king. Her attention remained fixed on Evelyn's left wrist where the silver crescent appeared once more beneath the candlelight, brighter than before and impossible to dismiss as imagination. The ancient mark shimmered for only an instant before fading again, but the elder's heart began to race. She had seen that symbol only once before, many years ago, inside a forgotten royal record that spoke of a Luna chosen not by ambition, but by destiny itself. Silence settled over the great hall after Alpha King Cale Ashbourne's final words, and no one seemed willing to disturb it. The musicians lowered their instruments, servants stopped in the middle of their work, and even the flickering candlelight appeared softer against the ancient stone walls. Ryan Holloway stood motionless, searching for an answer that would restore the confidence he had carried only moments before. Instead, he found only the calm, unreadable gaze of the king. Elder Miriam slowly stepped forward from the gathering, her weathered hands clasped before her as though she had finally accepted a truth she could no longer keep hidden. "Your Majesty," she said gently, "there is something you should see." Every eye followed her as she approached Evelyn Carter. Confused, Evelyn instinctively stepped back. "Elder, I do not understand." "Neither did I," Elder Miriam replied with quiet honesty. "Not until tonight." She carefully reached for the edge of Evelyn's left sleeve. With the Omega's hesitant permission, she folded the fabric back just enough to reveal the inside of her wrist. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then, as moonlight streamed through the tall windows beside the great hall, a delicate silver crescent slowly emerged beneath Evelyn's fair skin, glowing with a soft light that seemed to breathe with its own quiet rhythm. A collective gasp swept across the room. Elder Miriam closed her eyes for a brief moment before speaking words she had not uttered in decades. "The mark of the crown Luna." Whispered disbelief spread through the gathered wolves. Some shook their heads. Others stared in stunned silence. Ryan frowned. "That is impossible." Elder Miriam turned toward him. "It disappeared from the royal blood records more than 20 years ago. The old prophecies spoke of a Luna who would never seek power, never demand recognition, and would reveal herself only after her heart endured rejection without surrendering its kindness. Evelyn looked at the faint silver mark as though seeing it for the very first time. I have never noticed this before. Because it was waiting, Elder Miriam answered softly. Some gifts awaken only when the soul has been tested. Cale slowly walked toward Evelyn until only a few feet separated them. He did not reach for her. He did not interrupt the silence. His silver eyes simply met hers with the same quiet respect she had shown a stranger on the forest trail. You offered food when you believed you had little, he said. You chose compassion when no one was watching. You accepted heartbreak without allowing it to harden your spirit. Evelyn lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by everything unfolding around her. I only tried to do what felt right. A gentle smile finally touched Cale's face. That is exactly why it matters. He turned to face the assembled leaders of Moonridge. His calm voice carried effortlessly through the hall. Many believe greatness begins with strength. They are mistaken. True greatness begins with character. No one dared interrupt him. Ryan stood frozen, replaying every conversation he had ever shared with Evelyn, every moment he had dismissed her. Quiet heart as ordinary. For the first time, doubt replaced certainty. As the moon climbed higher above the valley, the silver crescent upon Evelyn's wrist shimmered once more, brighter than before, and for reasons none of them could explain, every candle inside the great hall burned a little steadier, as though the ancient walls themselves recognized that destiny had finally begun revealing a story no one had expected to witness. No one left the great hall after the revelation. It was as if the entire village feared that taking a single step might shatter the impossible moment they had just witnessed. The silver crescent upon Evelyn Carter's wrist slowly faded beneath her fair skin once again. Yet its brief appearance had already changed everything. The same people who had barely noticed her only days before now looked at her with expressions filled with disbelief, curiosity, and quiet respect. Evelyn herself felt none of the triumph they imagined. She only felt overwhelmed. The life she had accepted as ordinary had suddenly become something she no longer recognized. She looked toward Elder Miriam, searching for reassurance, but the wise elder simply smiled with gentle warmth. You are still the same woman you were this morning, she whispered. Only the truth has finally caught up with you. Those words settled Evelyn's racing heart. Across the hall, Ryan Holloway remained completely still. Every memory returned with painful clarity. He remembered Evelyn carrying supplies for elderly neighbors during harsh winters. He remembered her staying behind after festivals to clean the meeting hall while everyone else celebrated. He remembered countless moments when she had quietly helped others without asking for praise. None of those memories had seemed important before. Now they refused to leave him. He slowly approached her, his confident posture replaced by sincere uncertainty. Evelyn, he said quietly, I think I was wrong. She turned toward him with the same calm expression she had always carried. There was no anger in her eyes, only peace that surprised even herself. Ryan lowered his head. I spent so much time searching for someone extraordinary that I failed to recognize what was already standing beside me. Evelyn listened in silence before answering with gentle honesty. Perhaps we both followed the paths we believed were meant for us. Her kindness made Ryan's regret even deeper. He wanted forgiveness, yet he understood that forgiveness could never restore a choice already made. Nearby, the Pack Council gathered around Alpha King Cale Ashbourne, expecting him to announce new honors or titles after everything that had happened. Instead, Cale made a different request. Beginning tomorrow, he said calmly, every member of Moonridge will be judged by the character they demonstrate, not by the rank they inherit. The council exchanged thoughtful glances before nodding in agreement. Even the oldest leaders understood the lesson the evening had revealed. Strength could protect a kingdom, but only compassion could unite one. As guests slowly departed beneath the moonlit sky, many stopped to thank Evelyn for small acts of kindness she had performed months or even years earlier. An elderly baker thanked her for carrying flour when his back had failed him. A young mother thanked her for comforting a frightened child during a winter storm. A stable worker thanked her for tending an exhausted horse that everyone else had overlooked. Evelyn accepted every word with quiet humility, never claiming she had done anything remarkable. Standing a short distance away, Cale watched those simple conversations with quiet admiration. He realized he had not discovered greatness inside Moonridge. Greatness had been living there all along, unnoticed because it had never demanded attention. As the final lanterns dimmed and the village settled beneath the peaceful glow of the full moon, Kale looked toward the stars and silently thanked destiny for delaying his journey, because had he departed one day earlier, he would have ridden away without ever meeting the remarkable woman whose greatest strength had never been power, but the unwavering goodness of her heart. 3 months later, the first light of spring stretched across the royal valley as hundreds of wolves gathered before the white stone courtyard of the Crown Keep. Delegations from every neighboring pack had traveled for days to witness a ceremony unlike any recorded in recent memory. They expected a display of royal tradition. Instead, they witnessed something far greater. Evelyn Carter stepped onto the garden path wearing a simple silver gown that reflected the morning sunlight without overwhelming it. Her chestnut hair rested loosely over her shoulders, and the quiet grace that had once gone unnoticed now drew every eye without effort. She had not changed because of a title. She remained the same woman who carried water for elderly neighbors, comforted frightened children, and offered her own meal to a stranger in need. Only the world around her had finally learned to see her clearly. Alpha King Kale Ashbourne walked forward to meet her beneath the ancient cedar that had stood since the founding of the kingdom. There were no grand speeches meant to impress the crowd. Kale simply looked into Evelyn's eyes with the same calm respect he had shown her on the forest trail. "Before I knew your name," he said warmly, "I knew your heart. Before I learned about prophecy, I witnessed your kindness. Before anyone spoke of destiny, you showed me the kind of leader this kingdom truly needs." Evelyn smiled through grateful tears. "I never dreamed of standing here," Kale gently answered. "That is why you belong here." Elder Miriam stepped forward carrying an ancient silver circlet preserved for generations inside the royal archives. "The crown has waited many years," she said softly. "Not for the strongest, not for the loudest. It waited for the one who would place others before herself." As the circlet rested lightly upon Evelyn's head, sunlight broke through the clouds above the valley, filling the courtyard with warm golden light. A peaceful breeze stirred the cedar branches, and for a brief moment the silver crescent upon Evelyn's wrist appeared once more, brighter than ever before fading gently beneath her skin. Across the courtyard, Ryan Holloway watched in respectful silence. Regret still lingered within him, but it no longer carried bitterness. Instead, it had become a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. He finally understood that destiny had never taken anything from him. He had surrendered it himself the moment he judged another person's worth by appearances instead of character. As the ceremony ended, people from every pack approached their new Luna, not because they feared the crown, but because they admired the woman standing beside it. Children smiled as Evelyn greeted them by kneeling to their height. Elderly guests found her offering an arm before anyone asked. Servants received the same warm gratitude as respected leaders. Nothing about her kindness had changed. That was exactly what made it extraordinary. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the mountains and thousands of lanterns illuminated the royal gardens, Kale and Evelyn stood together overlooking the peaceful kingdom they would guide side by side. There was no need for promises spoken aloud. Their journey had already proven the truth that every heart gathered there would remember. The greatest treasure anyone can ever find is not the person everyone chooses first. It is the person who continues choosing kindness, even after the world has overlooked them. And sometimes, the one another person leaves behind becomes the very soul destiny has already prepared to wear the crown.